And from here on out, this podcast becomes much more what I originally planned it to be, which is moving through these myths at a faster pace, observing, collecting, seeing the patterns, and then logging the information and having each new episode reveal mysteries from the previous ones. Rather than trying to unwind everything that I read, I'm going to leave more things unknown, because now I'm going to break out, even though I'm going to keep the Greek as sort of the spine for comparison, I'm going to break out of the Greek and just do whatever I want. And so now I'm going to venture out into areas that I really don't know that much about. So in a sense, all I can do is look at them, observe them, make whatever observations I can right now, maybe compare a little bit to the Greek myths, etc., or highlight some things. But mainly, I want to cover them and log them and pile up that information and start to see patterns and have later podcasts answer questions from earlier podcast episodes. This episode is about a story from the California Indians. Of course, Indians are not broken up by state, so it's more of a culture region that would not exactly line up with California, but it roughly corresponds, and it's unified by common cultural traits, some linguistic traits, story patterns, art patterns, things like that. So the Indians of California, and this woman, she tapped the archives. I believe she's writing in the early 1900s. I think the book is actually 1930, 1940, around there. She tapped some museum archives of anthropologists who had visited these natives. And she writes extremely well. She writes in this simple, unadorned style. She doesn't try to insert her own personality too much. It's basically just what she read about the Indians, and she tried to make it as much as she could in their style, as much as you could in English, and then she sort of just barely added this framework of a narrative where a woman, an older tribal lady, is telling stories to a younger boy. And so it's basically story time, but the stories themselves are straight out of these records, these official anthropological records. Once there was a young man who was the son of a chief, and he was recently and happily married. So more or less, we have a prince and a princess. And being the son of the chief, he is materially well off. He's just found himself a lovely bride, and almost everybody in the village is happy for him. But there is one person who's not happy for him. An envious man, a noble of the tribe, who had wanted to marry this lovely young woman himself, but was continually spurned. Every time he would make an advance, she would turn the side of her face to him. He persists in his pursuit of this other man's wife, and she does not reciprocate at all. She's completely caught up in her newlywed bliss. And yet, the son of the chief and the princess live under the evil eye and the bad will of this envious noble. Several moons go by, and then one day, the princess falls sick, and her husband and family become concerned as her condition worsens. And the way that the book lays it out is very interesting, because the author doesn't explicitly say that somehow this is caused by the evil eye of this jealous neighbor, but it's eerily implied that there may be some sort of malintent, almost witchcraft, negative manifestation that causes the sickness. And as the story goes by, that thought is more confirmed, although never completely revealed. So her condition worsens, and she continues to decline until she's near death. The local shamans are then enlisted by the prince to help. The shamans travel back into the spirit world and try to bring her soul back into her body. Now, remember, we have this idea that we already looked at with our friend Mercury, the idea of the psychopomp, the guide of the souls to the realm of the dead, and also the messenger between the world of the dead and our world. And these shamans are, if I can use a word liberally, very mercurial. They're showing the traits of Mercury, going back and forth to the land of the ghosts, the dreamland, and then to our land. But they try to bring her soul back into her body, and she's already too far on her way. They say that her soul has become too small. It's already too small for the body. And it turns out that she has indeed died. Her soul has gone on to the world of the ghosts. When the chief's son learns that the shamans are unable to bring back his wife, he becomes completely dejected and loses the will to go on with his life. And this is one thing I notice about all these tales, and this is one reason why I like these time periods that I was mentioning before, the turn of the century into the 1900s and the 60s and 70s as well, is even though these books were meant to be able to relate to children and to tell these stories in a simple fairy tale kind of a way, fairy tales are dark, and they leave in this dark detail constantly, which is the fragile balance of the will to live. So many of these myths, I was even reading a myth today about the ram with the golden fleece, and part of the myth is when the young man gets rejected, he loses the will to live and starts to wither and become pale and sickly. And there's this blunt honesty about so many of these stories. So he's completely dejected. He loses the will to live. The shamans, whose specialty it is to find these things out, say that they're unable to solve the problem of bringing his wife's soul back into her body. He retires into the mountains and seeks supernatural power that perhaps might enable him to go on a journey and find his wife's ghost, her soul. 4 summers and winters, he retires into the woods and lives by himself. Let me see if I can get this quote. So he's up withdrawing himself, isolating himself to find power and to find a path to his wife. And here's how the book puts it. For 4 summers and 4 winters, the young man stayed in the mountains. He bathed every day and did all that was fit and proper. At the end of his doing these things, his eyes were so keen that no trail was hidden from them. Even ghost trails he could see, which before were secret. There are many such trails. The winds hide them. To follow them is not easy. Yet this young man found his wife's trail and followed it. He knew it by the lightness of her feet, and there were other ways by which he knew it. So finally, he's prepared to begin his long journey along the ghost trails. He passes through valleys and forests with distant voices echoing as he goes. And he arrives by a bright, placid lake. And by the lake, there's a flat stone, which is called a ghost stone, where all the ghosts gather before going to the land of the dead. There's many interesting details, but eventually a man appears paddling a canoe someone who he hopes can take him to the land of the ghosts where his wife lives. And this is called the Dreamland. Now, this last chunk of the story has so many parallels. It's almost more of a quintessential, it almost epitomizes the hero's journey in mythology. The idea of, after a long withdrawal and a vision, you pass through valleys and dark forests, distant voices are echoing, and then you arrive at a lake which separates the living from the dead, and there is a conductor to take you to the other side. At first, he can't quite discern the situation at the edge of the lake before he gets his bearings. He's a little confused, but he places a pebble inside of his mouth, and this is a trick that the shamans taught him, and all of a sudden he has the vision to see the situation. And now, right before I recorded this, I looked up this parallel because I knew there was a parallel here, but there's something really weird about this parallel, and let me just read out of this book about Greek mythology. There's a famous character in Greek mythology called Charon, not Karen, like the Karen at your city hall meetings. Charon. Some people say Charon, but apparently you're supposed to say Charon. Now, not only is this a boat conductor to the land of the dead, that detail about the pebble, placing the pebble in the mouth for vision, has a weird parallel in this description. Quoting from this Greek mythology book, my favorite one. Charon, a son of Erebus and Night, conducted the souls of the dead in a boat over the rivers, Styx and Acheron, to the infernal regions. But he conveyed no one without their tribute. And it was a custom among the ancients, in preparing the dead for burial, to place a piece of money under the tongue for Charon. When a departed soul presented herself for a passage in his boat, he first inquired whether the traveler could furnish the requisite fee. So there's this idea of putting the money under the tongue. I mean, I have to believe this was sponged up somehow by these Indians in California, but I don't fully know. Charon is represented as an old man with a ragged garment and a long, gray, neglected beard, and his forehead is lined with wrinkles. Now let me see if this other book describes the boatman here. They even have a picture of him. I need pictures. I can only read books with pictures or I don't understand it. Because I am a noble savage. Let's see, where is this? So he places the pebble in. The young man was glad. It was the land of the departed that he saw. Even with the lake between, he saw it plainly. It was grassy there. There were houses and people walked about. It looked very nice. On the lake there was one canoe only, and in the canoe there was a man paddling. The lake was very calm. Never had the young man seen water of such calmness. No one had even breathed upon it. The dead have no breath, that is well known. So I guess she doesn't describe the boatman in this book, but she emphasizes the placid water. Okay. So he takes the canoe and is paddled across the water. And on the other side of the water, there is the chief of the ghost land who will receive him and talk to him when he reaches the other side. And I think I'll pause this here and do a second episode so I don't cram too much information here. Not only does this have this parallel to Greek mythology with the boat going over the river, but this is also a very strikingly similar story to the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's another thing I noticed. But let me pause here and react. First of all, as far as the beginning of the story, the presence of a spiteful, envious, evil gaze or evil intent seems to be implied as at least partially the cause of his wife's sickness. This envy and ill will is presented in the story as looming over the situation and having a great deal of power to change reality. There's a black magic, sort of satanic vibe about this nobleman. He's not merely jealous, he's resolutely unhappy about the situation, and it continues to take actions to undermine their marriage. And remember our episode about Athena. She presides over the situation with the craftsman while a dwarf with an evil eye projects his malintent on the artisan. Now, another note on our story. Before going on his journey, the prince seeks the help of these specialists, the shamans. But this is something beyond even their reach and capabilities. And this seems like the fact that makes his individual journey inevitable. But what I noticed is there does seem to be a prescribed order that he follows when attempting to solve this situation. It's almost like he knows the steps. First, you consult the shamans, and then you retire to the mountains if that doesn't work. And after your time in the mountains, you hope for the vision. And as you follow the trails, you pay attention, and there are things you have to do that you learned from the shamans, like the placing of the pebble in the mouth to see the situation by the river. So although it's a difficult path, there is a simplicity in the sense that he seems to already know. He has this inherited tradition that he is following. Withdrawal into the mountains or isolation is used to gain power, but that power manifests first in the form of vision. His period of retirement enables him to see not another world, but another layer of reality in this world. This matrix of trails that individual ghosts have walked on their way to the dreamland. And that's exactly related to something we've talked about before, that mythology is not just a pile of stories. It's like an overlay that people really assumed, and even saying assumed is too much. They just simply had it. You either have the mythological vision or you don't, and when you have it, you're good to go. And when you don't, it doesn't matter how much reasoning and self-dialogue you do. His journey is absolutely classic in the themes of the hero's progress: valleys, forest, and then river dividing our world from the world of the dead. And as I said, this part of the story mirrors the Epic of Gilgamesh in several striking ways. Now, I'll close this one out by this very interesting little addition that the author of this book layers onto the story that she records from the California Indian tradition. But it seems like she's elaborating on something that is a real belief. Now, she writes this interesting little dialogue between the storyteller, the old woman, and the audience, which is this young man. So the young man, asking about this story that he's being told, says, "Very strange are your words, O wise one. For how can the dead say, 'Here is one come from dreamland,' when even children know it is the dead who dream? In the land of the living, dreams come by stealth only." "That is as it may be," answered the old woman. "For as things seem, so are they spoken of. Yet in that other country, on that far shore, there may be a different seeming. Does any tree appear the same from all sides? Think of this, O inquisitive one. They think of our world as dreamland. We call their world dreamland, they call our world dreamland." And that seems like some interesting food for thought, especially right now when everyone's pondering this idea of the nature of reality. It seems like there's something off about the reality that we live in. Is it a simulation? Is it an emanation? Could there be other beings that look at us as the more ephemeral, shadowy, fleeting ones?
We call their world dreamland, they call our world dreamland.